Okay, so I still don't know exactly how I'm going to talk about this video. But hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about optimism, pessimism, and how optimism breeds sociopathy. I'm actually surprised that there's people who are waiting for this topic. I didn't know, or else I would have really tried to push it out sooner. Because I just, was like, I'm working on it. I know people don't get it. I'm trying to work on it. But someone actually was just like, so when are you going to do that? You said you were going to do it. I'm like, wow, like you actually want to hear what I have to say? Not to say that it means they're going to agree or anything, but the fact that they actually want to hear it out, I appreciate that. So I'm just going to do my best to talk about it now. And if I screw it up, I will just come back and do it again. So, and we'll just leave it there. But basically, I want to cover optimism, pessimism, and then optimistic nihilism and pessimistic defeatism because they kind of come from the same mindset. They're just on opposite extremes. And something that I say all the time is that people do a lot of black and white thinking. They view everything in extremes. They don't know how to look at the nuances of a situation. So let's get into this. Here we go. Okay, so you have optimistic people. When you look at the world in an optimistic way, you're viewing things that are better than what they actually are. When you look at the world in a pessimistic way, you view it in a way that's worse than it actually is. When you are an idealist, it's kind of similar to optimism. It's more so focused around the outcome of things and not necessarily how to get there. And so it's not a real sort of antithesis for realism, but it's still not realistic. And, you have defeatists who just are like, nothing's going to change, nothing matters. And then you have nihilists who are like, who cares? So now, out of all of these people, the people that I hate the most are nihilists. And that's the trendy thing to be these days. But nihilism is just a walking contradiction of a philosophy. It's this idea that nothing inherently matters. And within itself, that's already not true, because why do you eat and go to sleep every day if it doesn't matter? There's things that do matter. There's different forms of something being important. There's different types of importance, different levels of importance, and different things meet different criteria of being important to other people. So it's just, nihilism is such a vague and just such a simple way of looking at life. But the sad thing is a lot of nihilists think that they're overly intelligent for this simplistic outlook. If you have a simplistic view of a complex problem, you're just not looking at it in an intellectual way. End of story. So I really hate nihilism because that's the thing that's ruining this planet the most and why everything's dying. And so I hate optimistic nihilists because that's the even more trendier thing to be these days, because people are just kind of sick of how it seems like it's impossible to fix problems. So when you look at these people who start off doing good, even with politicians, you look at people, in your life, people on YouTube, they start off more progressive and then eventually they just start to care about themselves, because you just get to this point of life where you're just like, it doesn't matter, everything's futile. And it's this narcissistic viewpoint that people have of themselves. You hear it all the time. People say, you can't fix everything, so why even bother? It's like, oh, well, I can't do it all by myself. The world is not about you. No one's telling you to fix the world's problems by yourself. When I was talking about, some of the Markiplier videos that I made, I remember I kept getting this one critique on them where people were saying, you just want him to talk about negative stuff all day. His videos aren't about the blah, blah, blah. And his videos aren't about charity, but he talks about charity all the time because it's important. And there's an argument for that, because he can also be doing it for his own social climbing, honestly. That's what rich people do. Horrible rich people who have people working in sweatshops donate more money to charity than Markiplier ever has. So the whole charity argument is just dumb. But regardless, it's just, that's something that is an important thing to talk about, and he talks about it for whatever reason. The reason doesn't matter. He discusses it. So he could also talk about important things in society. He's just not going to do it. You can even do it in a tactful way. People tell that to me all the time, where they're like, oh, just say it in a more agreeable way. So you all recognize that people like him can speak in an agreeable way because you're telling me to speak in an agreeable way. But he already does the agreeable stuff on his channel. So why is it so hard for him to speak about something important that's agreeable? Why does he only have to do trendy stuff? You know, like with the whole like virus outbreak and stuff. He wants to help with the virus like everyone else does, but that was trendy. Helping with Australia, you know, tornadoes. That's something that people were already discussing. Why not talk about the other stuff that people aren't talking about? Like how you have a lot of homeless subscribers. Like he has a lot of subscribers who are homeless. I was shocked when I was reading those comments. He had a lot of them. Like there's places in America where they don't care about you being homeless. Yes, they were housing the homeless at some parts, but there was still a lot of homeless people in the country who have like nothing that they could do. People who live in their cars, you know, they can't afford to have a lot of these places shut down. So it's just, anyway, I can't get back into that. But my whole point is, when you're an optimistic nihilist, these people start off being more considerate, these YouTubers and things like that. But as they get further in life, they start to become more selfish. And a lot of it comes from this narcissistic idea where it's like, well, I can't fix everything. So just like with that critique they kept giving me, he can't talk about everything. So why do you want him to talk about negative stuff? I'm like, every now and then to address a problem that's happening in the world really isn't that big of a problem. It's really not. It's not asking for much for people with a platform to every now and then discuss something controversial that is about people suffering in the world. That is not asking for a lot. I never in my life said that these people need to talk about everything. I never said they should do it every week, every month. I'm just saying every now and then discuss a problem. That's all I'm saying. And if everyone did that, the world would be a better place because you're creating a net positive when you do that. People with this optimistic viewpoint, if you look at a broken machine and you take a optimistic outlook on the machine, you know, you're not focusing on the issues of the machine. You're like, oh, well, I like the design of it. I like this part. It works nice. But this part, you know, I'm just going to ignore that because it's not really working. You're going to end up with an even more broken machine because it's just going to keep falling apart. But if you focus on the problems, you end up getting a better machine in the end. So when people tell me that they have to focus on positive things, they don't realize that when our focus is on positive stuff, it creates a net negative in the world. Why do you think climate change exists? Why do you think world hunger exists? Why do you think there's such a big wage gap, you know, between the 1% and the rest of the world? 90% of America has 1% of the country's wealth. That's not normal. The 1% is not contributing to the things that make the country function, but they own 1% of the wealth? And California alone is the 5th largest economy in the world. That is insane. That's insane. So people don't realize that when you focus on positive things, you create a net negative because optimism and positivity is selfish. It's a selfish thing. You don't want to focus on other people's problems. So like when people are like, you know, I did a video, one of my first like videos in my psychological playlist was about Matthew and the whole thing that happened with his friend. And I was trying to explain that people who talk to just anyone in general, it's not about him. When you speak to someone who is suicidal and you try to tell them to look on the bright side and like, you know, you try to do more positive stuff, optimistic, you take this optimistic viewpoint and you have the nerve to say that when this depressed person who you know is depressed, you said you knew it, they give you a hug and you say that was the real you. You just disregarded their feelings. You just disregarded who they actually are. They showed you who they are every single day. And for you to say when they give you a hug, now you acknowledge that this is the real them when it's not. Any psychologist will tell you that the last thing you do to someone with serious depression is invalidate their feelings. And whether you realize you're doing it or not, when you say that that's the real them, they had a good day that day, and you just focus on that happy stuff instead of talking about their actual problems, it drives them further into it. And so I'm saying that society in general, it's not one person who's responsible for what happened. You don't think that he went to other people in his life? It's when you have no one understanding where you're coming from. I think a lot of happiness does come from feeling understood. I notice that a lot with people. Why do you think people have friends? When people click with others, when they're dating, they'll just feel like, oh, you get me. That's what people say all the time. You get me. Understanding is something that brings people happiness. And when they don't feel understood, they get depressed. And so it's just so sad that when I say something like that, I'm pointing out a problem. And it's not even me saying, oh, you're a terrible person. I literally said I thought he was a nice guy. I said that. And I said, I didn't think that he's actually, like this or that, blah, blah, blah. I just think that, that's all I said. But people look at something like that and they're like, how can you say that? And it's just the focus is in the worst direction because I'm literally trying to prevent further suicide. That's the whole point of me saying that, telling you what suicidal people don't need to hear. The vast majority of people who feel that way do not want you to invalidate their feelings. They don't want you to just tell them empty stuff like, oh, the world's going to get better. I know because I have prevented suicides in my life. I've spoken to suicidal people my entire life. A lot of my friends have been suicidal. And it's not just with my friends, it's been strangers. Like I told you before, I was an altruistic empath. People literally come to people like me about their problems 24/7. And I'm not an altruist anymore, but I am an empath. And people always come to me about that type of stuff. So it's like, and I listen to what they have to say. And the one thing that they always told me, and I've talked about this with like professionals and stuff as well, like as I got older, but just I already knew this growing up just from common sense. The one thing they told me is you are the only person who I spoke to who didn't say this, and this and that. And the stuff they would always list was this optimistic stuff. They're like, that stuff just made me want to kill myself more. So it's super hot, and I'm just going to cut in real quick to say this, and then I'm going to turn on these fans because I'm dying right now. So I noticed that like a lot of people really hate that Matthew video. Like not everyone. It was really liked when it first came out, but now that I've gotten like a lot more hate on my channel, people have gone and seen it and they're like, I think that's the worst video you've ever done. And that's one of my favorite ones actually. And it's funny because they all like keep saying the same thing where they're just like, you said he could have done more. And I'm like, he could have. And it's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine who has actually been suicidal, and they were talking about how, it's like, okay, so he could have done more because if his friend committed suicide and he wasn't expecting it, then that means that you either weren't looking at the facts of the situation and weren't recognizing how sad he actually was, or else you wouldn't have been surprised, so you two aren't that close, or he didn't tell you enough for you to know that he was actually that sad because you two aren't that close. And I was like, exactly. It's exactly my point. And it's funny because, interesting, because a lot of people I'm noticing who have this argument are people who suck at dealing with suicidal people. A lot of my videos are like that, where I say something and people get mad because it personally addresses them. Like what I have to say applies to them when it comes to like what you're doing wrong as a person. It's happening to them, so they're arguing for someone else because they're actually just like that person. So they're making up excuses for themselves ultimately, rather than focusing on the situation at hand and removing themselves and being objective about it. So this person I was talking to, they're like, I've talked to people who are they're gonna kill themselves, you can't stop it. And I'm like, I've never talked to a suicidal person who killed themselves. I've helped a lot of suicidal people throughout my life, and they're just like, no, they're either gonna do it or they're not. And I'm like, that's because you don't know what to say. Like, you're just proving my point. Like, you suck at talking to suicidal people. And they were at one point in the conversation, they proved it because they looked at me and they said, are you saying that suicidal people want to have negative conversations? And the people that I know who have been suicidal, I showed this to them and they were like, yes. I even told the person during the conversation, I was like, yeah, they do. Like, what? It blows my mind people don't get that. And the same friend from before who I was talking to, they said the best thing ever. They were just like, what the f*** do you think therapy is? You talk about negative shit and try to work through the trauma in your fucking life. And it's so sad because, again, like I know I addressed it in this video. I recorded it like a few days ago, so I don't remember exactly how I addressed it, but it's just when you're dealing with people who are depressed and suicidal, when you're dealing with people who are going through stuff, you have to focus on the problem. That's why when like these days comedians keep talking about how their suicide jokes aren't for people who aren't suicidal. Like a lot of people get offended by suicide jokes and they're just like, it's not for you. The people who I know who are suicidal love my jokes because people like to, it's therapy for them. Anyway, I could say so much more on it, but it just proves my point that focusing on me telling someone that they're not helping suicidal people and saying that that's negative, so don't talk about it, just shows the fact that optimism is so empathic because I'm trying to prevent suicide. And you're like, no, don't do that because it's negative. Fuck you. So for people to watch a video like that and say, what you said is negative, like you shouldn't have said that because that was his friend, when I'm telling you that he just invalidated a suicidal person's feelings, your priorities are in the wrong direction. And that's the rot of optimism. It's the rot of optimism, because when you focus on positive stuff, you are creating a net negative. When you focus on the negative aspects of a situation, you are creating a net positive, because you're focusing on what's wrong with it. And as long as you're saying what should be fixed about it, it's fine. The places where it gets out of hand is when you become a pessimistic defeatist. That's a very bad thing. And that's pretty much what a lot of pessimists are. And like being a pessimist in general is not the right thing to be. People should be realistic. People say realism doesn't exist. That's a logical fallacy, because there is a reality. So you can be a realist. Like, actually, I'm going to go on a quick tangent to just disprove this notion that objectivity is fake, because there's philosophers. I can't stand philosophers, honestly, like, because it's like, just because you're a philosopher doesn't mean that you know what you're talking about. Anyone can be a philosopher, you know? But there's like a lot of philosophers who say objectivity isn't real. That is the biggest logical fallacy of the entire history of humanity and consciousness, okay? And here's the obvious no-brainer reason why you can factually prove that objectivity exists. If you make the statement that objectivity doesn't exist, then you are implying that that statement within itself is biased, which means objectivity does exist. End of the story. That is the end of the argument, because either you are being biased when you say that objectivity doesn't exist, or you are being objective when you say objectivity doesn't exist. And both of them lead to the fact that objectivity does exist. Is everything objective? No. That's the whole problem with viewing things in black and white extremes. You can say that humans are inherently biased, but that doesn't mean that they can put work in to look at something in an objective way. The whole point is to be as objectively as possible. You know, and another problem with these optimistic nihilists is that they say the common argument I hear is, you know, what's right to one person is wrong to another. Okay, so we live in a majority rules world. Whether you like it or not, that's the world we live in. Everything that happens in this world is what the majority has agreed to, including the fact that billionaires control our lives and are making us into like human slaves and are working us to our death just so that they can make an extra buck off of each person. You know, that's something that we all are condoning, because if we were to do something about it, which people have done in the past, there have always been uprisings. You know, whatever the majority allows is what is allowed in the world. It's your job as an individual to make your case to the majority of what you think should change. And if you can either brainwash them into believing you or just, you know, convince them, that will be the new rule. And humans have been brainwashed to accept this capitalistic crap in our society. Now, people say that there's nothing wrong with capitalism. There is. Capitalism without any rules would kill us all. It's already doing it because there are barely any rules in this capitalistic society. You know, America contributes to climate change more than I think anyone else in the world because of all the fracking and these fossil fuels and the fact that we're stealing oil from other countries and all this other stuff. If we had no rules whatsoever, capitalism would just run rampant and destroy us all. And so again, that's why I don't like libertarians, because they don't know what they're talking about. When you say that the free market is, you know, oh, you need to trust the free market. The government is run by human beings. The free market is run by human beings. If you looked at this objectively, you'd realize that government within itself isn't a problem. It's the humans in the government. And those humans are regular people. They're at one point, before you were a politician, you weren't, or your parents weren't, or whoever, and then you became one. It's something wrong with humans. So this whole free market thing is just, ugh. Anyway, so my point is, like, these optimistic, nihilistic people who tell you that there's just nothing matters, you know, they end up becoming selfish. That's the whole part of the optimism, because optimism is inherently selfish, wanting things to be good or happy or positive. You hear people say it all the time. They say, like, today was supposed to be a good day, when you're trying to vent to someone about something. Like, can you not vent about this? Today's supposed to be a good day. That's a selfish thing to say. Someone's telling you that they're upset. They're not having a good day. But you're telling them today's supposed to be a good day because you want a good day. It's just, optimism is the most selfish thing. And if you notice with a lot of these singers and stuff, when they're depressed, they write more empathetic music. And then when they get happy, they write the most selfish music you've ever heard. You know, when they're like more poor, when they're like lower in terms of celebrity status, they sing about stuff that's more real. And the more privileged they get, the more empty their music becomes, and it's just more optimistic and selfish. Like, there's a pattern here that I'm trying to point out to people. And people say, well, why doesn't psychology talk about how optimism breeds sympathy? There's probably some stuff out there right now, because I've been seeing some stuff that's uncovering how narcissistic we are. Just a few years ago, there was nothing in psychology saying that most people have narcissistic tendencies, at least almost nowhere. Now it's easy to find that information. So people don't understand that psychology is not something that has been figured out through and through. It's still being developed, and it's not, some stupid people say, oh, that means that psychology doesn't mean anything. No, it's that the human brain is complicated and there's only a few people working on figuring it out. But the problem is that people don't realize that there's a lot of propaganda in psychology, as well as like our healthcare and all that stuff. We already know for a fact that the pharmaceutical industry is very corrupted. There's a lot of corruption in that. People get prescribed medication just so that some rich people can make some extra money. So it's not a far stretch. It's not like a tinfoil hattie, just like with no evidence sort of thing to conclude that psychology is brainwashing us to be optimistic. It's so funny because I've been talking about this like in my personal life and like in chats and stuff for a very long time, like for years. And I allude to on my channel, I just never did this type of video. But there's this movie called They Live that I just saw like a month or two ago. And even in that movie, there's like this scene where it's a movie about like people being brainwashed and how they don't realize what's actually going on in their world and what's actually like destroying them as people. And one of the things that the people who were brainwashing all the humans said was, we should always be optimistic. We should never be pessimistic. That was the thing that they put in the movie. Ugh. Implying that like when you have this optimistic outlook, it's meant to quell the anger. It's meant to stop you from thinking into something. It's meant for you to just be content with the horrible deal you've been given in life rather than fight for something better. So yeah, that movie made me just feel much better. It was a dumb movie because of the main character. That was the dumbest person I've ever seen in my life. But the way that they handle societal issues in that movie, you should watch it. It's a very interpretive film. But yeah, so it's just, again, when you have that outlook, it's just the most selfish thing. And I think that the reason why we don't talk about it enough in psychology is because if you look at a lot of these studies that are done, they're done on privileged people. Even when it's like people who don't seem as privileged. For one, it's a lot of like privileged people, in like privileged areas, a lot of white people. It's, and I know that not all white people are privileged. Anyone who's insinuating I'm saying that is just nitpicking. It's stuff that I don't even believe. So moving on from that, it's not worth addressing. You should have common sense to know that that's not what I'm implying. But it's a lot of privileged people taking these tests. They're not going out of their way. Like one study that people have shown is that when you expect something good to happen, the studies have been showing that you're less let down than if you expect something bad. And they said it's because, if you expect something that's good and it doesn't work out, it's like, you feel a little bit bad. But often when you expect something good and something good happens, you feel even better. When you expect something bad and something good happens, you still feel bad. And I'm like, okay, but you're not doing this study on people whose lives never work out. The people who are living paycheck to paycheck. The people who are afraid to go to the doctor when they get hit by a car. They tell you, don't call an ambulance because I can't afford the doctor. They're not looking at the people who can't afford a $400 emergency. That's what, 40% of the country now? They're not doing it on those people. They're not doing it on the homeless. They're not doing it on these people who are struggling. And this is common. Again, 90% of the country owns 1% of the wealth. So for you to even insinuate, when something good happens, you feel better. Look at people whose lives are not working out at every turn. For those people to be more optimistic, they will kill themselves. And again, I've spoken to suicidal people my entire life. And the more optimistic they were, the more they wanted to kill themselves because nothing was working out. It just wasn't working out. So you're even more let down when you have that optimistic outlook if your life is a life that's like that. If you're lucky enough for stuff to work out for you sometimes in this world, then do whatever optimistic crap you want to do for your own outcomes. Fine. But for the rest of people to promote that is just BS. With slaves, when America had slavery, still does, but you know what I mean. When they had that, they would tell you, when the owners die, they're going to burn in hell for what they're doing. You'll be saved and go to heaven. That was a way to give people an optimistic outlook to continue to put up with this abuse. And so it's just, there's so many examples that I could go through. And I know I'm not doing the best job of covering it. I'm going on a lot of tangents, but it's because I still don't know how to talk about it in a very constructive way. But I need to explain it to some degree for people. What time am I at? Okay, it's like 25 minutes long, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But the point that I'm making is realism is what we should all strive for. Pessimism is the closest thing to realism because realistically, most things in the world are bad. We know this because the planet is dying. That means that there is a net negative being created on the planet. The planet is dying in so many ways right now that can't come from one incident. It's a snowball effect. It's a series of things, and a lot of it comes from pollution, yes, but look at how we have this pollution. Look at our governments. Look at all the corruption and all the things that we enable. These people came from regular homes, and then they became politicians. But what in their regular homes made them want to be these sick people in the first place? Is because there's stuff rotting in our systems with our families. Why do people hate their parents so much? And then they become parents and you know, their kids hate them, but no one ever takes responsibility for the fact that their parenting is bad. There's so many problems right now that people are not addressing. And when you have a world where people are not addressing negative things, which is what you have to do to fix problems, you have to focus on the negative to get a positive outcome, you're going to get a world that's falling apart. So that's why pessimism is the closest thing to realism, because when you're looking for problems, it's easier to find a way to fix them because you're never going to find problems when you're purposefully avoiding them, which is what optimism is. So optimistic nihilists and pessimistic defeatists are both people who are like, nothing matters, so why bother? But it's just with the pessimistic defeatists, it's internal, the problems that they're creating. Optimistic nihilists are pushing problems out. You're forcing other people to be more depressed by forcing your optimism on others. When people are pessimistic defeatists, they just stop trying. When you're an optimistic nihilist, you're telling other people that it doesn't, not to try to fix the world's issues. So if we all just did a little bit, if we all just tried to figure out a little bit more about humanity, if we all tried to consider each other a little bit more, if we all tried to, look for issues and fix them and talk about serious subjects from time to time, the world would be a better place. And we're just not doing that because people have this narcissistic view where they're like, I can't fix the world's problems. I can't do it all by myself. Well, guess what? You share this world with 7 billion other people, so you're not supposed to. The world doesn't revolve around you. So, yeah, hopefully that clears some stuff up for people. But yeah, that's all I really got to say on this. So, thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you all next time.